Witcher 3 is by far one of my favorite games. Dare I say, my favorite game of all time. I have 9 full playthroughs under my belt, and at this point, when I say this to people, they look at me like I'm mentally unstable or something like that. Well, sucks to be them. Anyway, even though I love this game to bits, I can still acknowledge there are certain issues with it. Now, Witcher 4 is coming, and I'm very excited for that game as well. But the thing is, I wouldn't like to see things in Witcher 4 that bothered me in Witcher 3. I want Witcher 4 to be the best thing ever, and since I have the opportunity to say something about the matter, I most certainly will. As always with these series of mine, we're talking about gameplay mechanics and features, so keep that in mind. And that's the topic of the video today. What would I like to see in Witcher 4 based on the experiences of Witcher 3? There won't be any particular order of the things I will discuss. I'm just gonna talk about stuff that comes on top of my head and then work my way forward. There will be timestamps, so feel free to use them to skip to a section that interests you the most. Before I start, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps a lot. Okay, let's get this show on the road. Number 1. Those damned smuggler caches. The first thing that comes to my mind about the stuff I'm not fond in Witcher 3 were the points of interest in water in Skellige Isles. See, for a long time I just ignored them, but they were bothering me so much because I am a completionist. Once I see a question mark on the map, I have to uncover it and complete it. I kinda knew they were pointless, but on one of my playthroughs I decided to go for it and do all of them, just so I can say I did them. That was basically the whole idea behind it. And yes, I confirmed my suspicions, they were absolutely pointless. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So, as you can see, this is the map of Skellige Isles. I have taken the liberty to single out hidden treasures, smuggler caches, and spoils of war. The thing that bothered me the most were the smuggler caches. If you don't know, they are points of interest that are represented by these barrels that have this sort of a mask icon above them. In Skellige, there is a total of 58 of them, and I believe all of them are in the water. Not only do you need to use a boat to reach them, but you also need to dive in order to loot the chests that are floating in the sea. I mean, not a huge problem by any means, but having 58 of them is way too much. They give a lot of items, which is not bad if you are considering selling or breaking them down for extra profit. But then again, since most of the time I never really heavily engage with them, I didn't notice the impact of me ignoring them completely. In other words, I think they are pointless, they just clutter the map needlessly, and they are artificially extending playtime. I suspect the real reason to put them there was the fact that we are talking about island chain and there is a lot of empty space there. If you don't put stuff in the water, it kinda looks like wasted space. The game also significantly compresses the actual size of the islands for gameplay purposes if you take the books into account. For example, major islands like Skellige and Faroe would be much larger to sustain their populations. So for Witcher 4, it's rather obvious what to do. Don't litter the sea or any large water surface with loads of points of interest like smuggler caches. It just doesn't bring anything to the game. It's clearly a filler content and frankly, I don't see anything beneficial from it. Couple of them here and there, just like in Wellen is perfectly fine, just don't overdo it. Number 2. Inventory management. Inventory management in The Witcher 3 can cause a bit of frustration, largely because of how quickly the game overwhelms you with items and how little support the interface provides to manage that volume effectively. From the early hours onward, you are constantly looting weapons, armor, crafting materials, books, notes, quest items, alchemy ingredients, trophies, and other miscellaneous junk. While this abundance initially feels rewarding, it soon turns into clutter, forcing you to spend an increasing amount of time navigating menus instead of engaging with the world. I believe the issue lies in the lack of meaningful item categorization and filtering. Although items are technically separated into tabs, each category quickly becomes bloated with dozens, sometimes hundreds of entries that look visually similar and are difficult to distinguish at a glance. The Other tab showcases this problem. You can find all kinds of stuff there, and it feels like a mishmash of all the items that don't really have their dedicated inventory tab. Also, at one point, because I had so many items in inventory, the inventory screen started to lag. I kid you not. Sorting options are also limited, making it unnecessarily difficult to identify what is useful, what's outdated, and what can be safely sold or dismantled. This creates constant friction, particularly in long play sessions where inventory upkeep becomes a routine chore rather than a strategic decision. Weight limits exacerbate these problems rather than adding interesting resource management. Once you exceed a carry limit, Geralt becomes encumbered, slowing movement and discouraging exploration. When I started playing the game for the first time, it was a struggle because everything you looted over-encumbered you so fast. Naturally, I managed to finish the game, but for the second playthrough, I installed a mod called Over 9000, Weight Limit mod. And since then, I never stopped using it because it greatly improved my experience. This pretty much tells you what the issue with the inventory management is. Your weight limits are too low and the items are too heavy. In theory, weight limit should encourage thoughtful inventory management, but in practice it often results in frequent trips to merchants or stash boxes just to dump excess loot. For example, when you first hit Velen and you are able to roam free all over the world, one bandit camp is enough to stop you from adventuring further simply because looting everything they had is going to over-encumber you, especially when it comes to looting armor and weapons. I mean, I want to grab everything they have in order to sell the items or gold, but it's not possible. You can barely do one location without going back to a trader or a storage chest in order to offload your items. So instead of asking you to make meaningful choices, the system pressures you into repetitive maintenance that interrupts gameplay flow. Crafting materials are another source of frustration. The game showers you with herbs, monster parts, ores, and alchemical ingredients, many of which are rarely used or only relevant for a handful of recipes. Because there is no clear indication of long-term usefulness, you are incentivized to hoard everything just in case, further bloating the inventory. I mean, that's what I did because at that time it made sense to do it. One thing you need to realize, this hoarding behavior is not a failure. It's a rational response for a system that doesn't communicate scarcity, relevance, or any type of clarity. The problem becomes even more apparent when interacting with crafting and alchemy systems. You often struggle to track which materials you already own, which ones you need, and where those materials are stored. While some materials are shared across crafting and alchemy, others are stored in confusing ways, making preparation feel more tedious than tactical. And I don't even want to talk about mutagens and all that stuff. The inventory is just full of them, and you maybe use 15% of them, bar from the ones that you need to use to make oils, potions, and bombs for alchemy. Quest items and books add another layer of clutter. Many quest-related items remain in inventory long after their relevance has passed, with little indication of whether they can be safely discarded. Books and notes, while valuable for world building, often pile up without clear sorting or importance markers. If you enjoy lore, you may feel compelled to keep everything, while others who don't really care grow frustrated at the inability to easily separate flavor items from functional ones. All of these issues contribute to create a sense that the inventory system is fighting you rather than supporting you. Instead of reinforcing immersion and preparation, inventory management becomes a mechanical obligation, which you don't really enjoy, you kinda tolerate it. So what to do for The Witcher 4? Well, first thing I would suggest is to increase maximum weight a player can hold. If you don't want to do that, then make use of the horse like in KCD2 in terms of mobile storage. Then, when you are done, you dump everything in the storage chest and you're good to go. Second thing would be to introduce more inventory tabs. The more the merrier, since it allows you clearer overview of the items you have. You don't necessarily need to go overboard with it just for the clarity purposes. For example, it would be nice to see an inventory tab dedicated only to books, which again in Witcher 3 we don't have. That way when you are going through inventory, you're not cluttered by stuff in the other tab and you have a clear overview of what is going on. Third thing, introduce inventory tabs and filters in the storage chest. It would be nice to go through the storage chest in the same manner you go through inventory. I never really fully understood why this wasn't a thing in The Witcher 3. It seems that the storage chest has its own system where it puts weapons and armor on top, then you have your crossbow bolts, and then at the bottom you have all kinds of stuff for upgrading like runestones or glyphs. Number 3. Crafting. Crafting in The Witcher 3 is an interesting one. Other than making runes and repair kits, I rarely use it for anything else other than making Witcher gear. That changed a bit in Blood and Wine, but only because I had a mod that reduces set number requirements for the set bonuses, giving me a chance to use weapons that were introduced in the expansion. So, in that sense, crafting is largely redundant outside of Witcher gear. This renders large portions of the crafting system effectively optional or irrelevant. When crafting is only truly valuable for a narrow subset of items, it stops feeling like a core progression system and instead becomes a specialized side mechanic with limited appeal. The crafting upgrade path for Witcher gear, for example, while more meaningful, introduces its own gremlins. Upgrading Witcher sets requires multiple tiers of materials, visits to increasingly specialized craftsmen, and escalating costs. While this adds structure, you might feel the process is artificially drawn out. The effort often outweighs the reward, particularly when the resulting gear may soon be out-leveled or replaced. Instead of feeling like a long-term investment, crafting can feel like busy work stretched across the entire game. Another issue is the lack of meaningful choice within crafting itself. Most recipes have fixed outcomes with no variation in quality, modifiers, or trade-offs based on how the item is crafted. You don't really make interesting decisions about materials, craftsmanship, or specialization. Once the recipe is unlocked and the materials are gathered, the outcome is predetermined. This removes any sense of mastery or personalization from the system. Economic imbalance further compounds these problems. Crafting costs can feel arbitrarily high, especially for high-tier items, pushing you towards selling loot or exploiting merchant systems rather than earning money through contracts. This creates a feedback loop where crafting feels less like a reward for gameplay and more like a resource sink that exists to drain accumulated wealth. Finally, crafting lacks narrative and world integration. Smiths and armorers rarely feel distinct beyond their skills tier, and crafting an item rarely triggers dialogue, story beats, or recognition from the world. From a game so deeply invested into narrative immersion, crafting feels oddly mechanical and disconnected, an abstract system operating alongside a story rather than within it. So, what to do about crafting in The Witcher 4? Frankly, there are many avenues that can be discussed, but I would go with this particular one. For example, let's say that you can wear any armor you want, alongside with any weapon you want. If you want a set item bonus on it, you make the desired set item and then you extract the set bonus power from it and then you slap it on the armor. That way you can have modularity and freedom to do whatever you want. Same thing can be done with stats. You find an item piece in the wild that has, let's say, sign intensity and stamina regeneration, and you extract that and slot it in the armor, and there you have it. Basically what I'm saying is, I would make armor and weapon system where you as a player would craft stuff for yourself. Armor would have base armor values, while weapons would have base damage values. Then you would have several slots where you can introduce various stats and eventually, if you want, set bonus powers. Next point would be to allow us, the players, to upgrade armor continuously instead of leveling it periodically. The base stats can be upgraded continuously, level by level, or even better, they will level with the player. The rest of the upgrades that you have applied on weapons and armor will not level with you. You will have to find better versions of the stat combos in the wild and extract them, but you can always reapply the better ones over the ones that you have. While you are doing the extraction for the better stuff, you will be destroying the item, but that would mean that the look of the item will also be stored for you in order to be crafted again. You want a specific look with your designated stat combos? Not a problem. You can craft a base item, be it a weapon or an armor piece, and there you have it. You have a specific look that you are looking for. This crafting system will make crafting interesting because you can have so many combos of both the looks and the stats, and I mean that's what crafting is all about. This way every item is relevant. You aren't doing the Witcher gear supremacy, you're basically mixing and matching looks as much as you want, and on top of that, you are not limited by anything. Naturally, this will also include the option to dye your armors as well, just like it was introduced in Blood and Wine. So basically, we are hitting two birds with one stone in this particular crafting system. We don't need any type of transmogrification. You can just build your base item, for example, an armor piece. It will have a couple of slots for you to put your upgrades that you extracted previously. You then dye your item, and there you have it. You are also not limited to exact Witcher gear looks. You can mix all kinds of types of combos with different chest pieces, legs, gloves, all that good stuff. And you create your own visual style, which again is amazing. Since we were always stuck in Witcher 3 with 4, maximum 5 different looks, and that was basically it. I'm actually rather curious what you guys think about this particular idea of mine, so please write down in the comment section if it's good, if it's bad, if it needs improvement, stuff like that. Number 4. Itemization. One thing that bothers me a lot in The Witcher 3's itemization is how often rewards feel disconnected from their narrative importance. Throughout the game, you complete long, emotionally charged quests, only to be rewarded with weapons or armor that are extremely disappointing. I mean, just look at the reward you get at the end of the quest of swords and dumplings. The particular sword that you get as a reward, Blade from the Bits, is supposed to be this gigachad epic blade made by this famous weaponsmith. Instead, you get a sword that's immediately forgetful. This creates a jarring disconnect between story and gameplay, where a sword described as legendary, ancient, or even uniquely powerful is immediately outclassed by random loot found in the roadside chest, not to mention Witcher gear. I immediately scrapped Blade from the Bits for materials, and that was that. Same thing happened with the sword that Krach gives you, Winter's Blade. I don't know why this happens. Is it because of the level scaling or some other factor? I can't really tell, simply because I didn't really go that deep into those systems. But at the end of the day, it isn't really important why this is happening. The real issue here is that it is happening. Speaking of the Witcher gear sets, they are great, but they reveal deeper itemization issues. You are incentivized to stick with a single school set for long stretches of the game, reducing build diversity and making other gear effectively irrelevant. Instead of expanding your gearing options, itemization narrows them. Also, since they are so powerful, no other item will ever be considered good enough. In my case, after I got my first Witcher set, I simply kept either selling or breaking everything I looted because I knew there is nothing even remotely good other than the next upgrade. And when there was time to get an upgrade, usually it was just another Witcher gear set. This issue was somewhat mended with the introduction of weapons in Blood and Wine like Belhaven Blade or Geschäft, but equipping them is only possible if you use a mod that reduces requirements for the Grandmaster bonus sets. Otherwise, it's simply pointless to use them. Second problem is that they are locked behind extensive scavenger hunts and crafting. I don't really mind having a scavenger hunt for Witcher gear, but what I do mind is not being able to access that particular gear earlier on in order to specialize into a certain playstyle. For example, in Velen, the only set available for you is the Griffin set. You can find Cat set only when you get to Novigrad, while the Bear set is available only when you reach Skellige. And I won't even mention the Wolf set, because by the time you reach Kaer Morhen, you might as well forget that particular set exists. So, for example, if I want to play as a tanky, strong style individual that uses adrenaline from the start, I'm pretty much locked out of that playstyle due to the fact I can't craft the set. And that's basically what the issue is. Now that I think about it, every single loot that you find after you are able to make Witcher gear becomes pointless in a sense of utilizing it. Let me expand on it. Items lack a meaningful item effect. Most weapons differ only in raw damage numbers and a handful of minor bonuses such as small percentage increases to critical chance or, for example, sign intensity. These modifiers rarely change how the game is played. Without transformative perks like unique mechanics, trade-offs, or playstyle defining effects, items feel interchangeable. You don't care what you are wielding and focus only whether the number is higher than what they had before. Relic and unique items suffer particularly from this problem. Despite their rarity and lore significance, many relic weapons offer no meaningful advantage beyond slightly better stats at the moment they are acquired. Once you out-level them, they lose all relevance. The game provides no way to upgrade, reforge, or meaningfully evolve these items, which would otherwise allow players to carry story-relevant gear forward into later stages of the game. The only exception to this rule is the legendary Silver Sword, Erendite, but you get it so late in the game that it basically is meaningless to you or your whole playstyle. It is just some kind of a gimmick, but that's about it. It can only show its full power if you play New Game Plus because it levels with you, and then while you are using it non-stop, you can see the true power of the sword. Another thing with the itemization is basically the lack of visual identity. Because most of the time you're using the Witcher sets, technically speaking every single player kinda looks the same. The only difference is what kind of build you're using and therefore what kind of armor complements that particular build type. You could introduce transmog system to diversify visual identity, but for me that was never a problem. That being said, I can understand some people wanting to change their looks from time to time, and that's a valid thing. I, however, had an issue with lack of dyes in the base game, and I had to wait till I reached Tucson in order to dye my armors. Fortunately, I know how to use console commands, so I sorted that problem in that particular way. Not to mention, my issue was very low-level pleb type issue where I just wanted to dye my stuff in black, and that was it. But the thing is, transmog doesn't really make a lot of sense, but then again, we are talking about a world with magic and all that stuff, so you could introduce it in order to facilitate different weapon and armor design being more utilized instead of being restricted to maximum 5 armor styles and 4 weapon looks. But once again, I already mentioned how I would sort that problem in the crafting section, so yeah, I think I have this covered. Item rewards also lack clear identity across quest lines and factions. Completing a major quest for a powerful character or organization rarely grants items that reflect that relationship mechanically. Instead of receiving gear with unique thematic bonuses or narrative callbacks, you are often handed generic equipment that could have come from anywhere. This further reinforces the sense that items exist in isolation from the world and its stories. Now, some of you might say something like, Well, we got a unique sword from Olgir if you save him, the Iris, or you get that shovel from the Gravekeeper or Undertaker or whatever the name of that creature is. But you don't really use it. You just use it 2 or 3 times to swing the weapon and then you ditch it because it completely goes against a defined Witcher playstyle, so to speak. So again, we are back at square one with what I already said. So what can be done in The Witcher 4 to offset these issues? Well, I already touched on some aspects of itemization through crafting since they are closely connected. That kinda explains how itemization can be improved in the grand scheme of things. As for other problems, for starters, every weapon that you receive, especially if it's a weapon from a long-ass quest chain, or a person who is some sort of a master craftsman, should be really powerful. Could you extract its special power? I don't think so, since by doing this, it would remove the uniqueness of the item. I would still be up for upgrading it in some manner, but the uniqueness of the unique item should be preserved, and the item should be very deadly, and it would take a lot of effort to replace that type of a weapon. That being said, there shouldn't be abundance of these unique items because it's silly to have a gazillion of uniques or relics, since that already makes them not that unique to begin with. I would still be okay with Witcher sets being crafted in the same manner like in Witcher 3, but their powers should be extractable, just like I mentioned in the crafting section. Overall, I believe both crafting and itemization are very important, especially for a Witcher game, and it is very obvious to me that these two systems weren't performing admirably in The Witcher 3, and hopefully this can be changed for the next game. Number 5. Economy. While the early hours can feel appropriately tight, forcing you to choose which repairs, potions, or diagrams are worth their limited crowns, the sense of economic tension often collapses as the game progresses. After reaching the mid to late game, money eventually stops being a meaningful constraint, undermining systems that are supposed to reinforce the fantasy of a Witcher working contract to contract. Naturally, installing the weight limit mod helps a lot in this sense, since you can haul a lot of items and can obtain cash by selling them. However, this criticism is not aimed towards loot selling, but something else. For example, the primary source of income doesn't really align with the game's most expensive systems. High-end gear crafting, especially Witcher school sets, rune upgrades, and master-crafted items can be extremely costly. However, contracts, a thematically the core of Witcher's profession, often pay surprisingly little in comparison. I can understand a simple peasant barely scraping coin for the contract and offering a relatively low amount of coin, but when we are talking about a whole village chipping in for the reward, or a wealthy individual for example, this makes little sense. As a result, you frequently feel pushed towards selling looted gear, farming enemies, or abusing merchant systems rather than earning money through narrative-appropriate activities. This creates a disconnect between story and mechanics, where monster hunting feels less economically relevant than scavenging. Another recurring issue is the imbalance between loot value and vendor pricing. The majority of items you find, especially weapons and armor, are worth very little when sold, while essential upgrades demand large sums of gold. This leads to a sense of artificial scarcity early on, followed by sudden wealth once you discover efficient money-making strategies. When you realize which items to sell, which merchants to exploit, or how to optimize loot in general, the economy becomes trivial rather than engaging. Yes, this is a valid strategy, I understand that, but it shouldn't be a thing. Then there is a problem with merchants and not having enough money for me to sell my stuff. I mean, no wonder they are buying your stuff for pennies because their own capacity is very questionable. Thankfully, there is a mod for that, which is called More Money to the Merchants, but I should point out this shouldn't be a practice, this should be balanced from the get-go. I shouldn't rely on a mod to have a smooth gameplay experience. That doesn't mean that I dislike modders. On the contrary, I mentioned several mods that enhance my play sessions, but I'm a firm believer that the developer should basically fix these issues from the get-go instead of relying on the mods. Skyrim, I'm looking at you. In my mind, mods should mostly be used to modify stuff like visuals, graphics, and all that, but not the core gameplay systems. But I digress. Moving on. Bartering system is also questionable. There is absolutely no consistency in terms of how much money you can barter from a person. The only advice I can give is to save your game before engaging with bartering and then hope for the best. For example, sometimes I can get 50 orens from a person, and then when I reload my game, the same person offers me only 20 max. That being said, continuously reloading to get that extra 20 orens that you think you might get is not a great strategy. Eventually, I just gave up on it. It's a neat system, but it is not fleshed out properly. Upgrades tied to progression systems further highlight problems with the economy. Systems like rune-write enchantments or higher tier crafting or even rebuilding the house in Corvo Bianco are disproportionately expensive relative to their gameplay impact. You know how I said a couple of paragraphs ago that money isn't a problem mid to late game? Well, I remember struggling to afford these upgrades not because they were rare or meaningful, but because the economy itself felt poorly tuned. That rune-write person, for example, he was asking way too much money to upgrade his workshop to the fullest. I remember saving money wherever I could and selling everything that I managed to get my hands on just to be able to make the whole thing properly operational. In that sense, in some cases, you delay or entirely ignore certain mechanics, not because you don't want them, but because the cost feels unreasonable compared to the perceived benefits. The abundance of loot also contributes to economic flattening. By the mid-game, you are often drowning in swords, armor, and crafting materials, many of which have little practical use. This surplus diminishes the value of individual rewards and further erodes the sense of progression. When money becomes easy to acquire throughout sheer volume rather than deliberate effort, financial decisions lose weight and upgrades become routine purchases instead of meaningful investments. So, how to make this more bearable in The Witcher 4? Well, several things. First is to fix bartering in a way that you can actually put some pressure on a person. Let's say during the initial stages you can figure out how desperate a person is. That will tell you whether or not you can squeeze more coin from them. Also, utilizing XC as a way of persuasion should be a thing for these matters. Then you can pretty much have a formula that goes something like this. You have a base price, plus the desperation coefficient, plus XE coefficient, plus whatever else can influence your bartering power. Maybe you need to rummage through their house to find a note saying things that, go in your favor to raise the price. Something along the lines. Pretty much how the real-life bartering functions. That's basically what I'm aiming at. Second thing is to make economy logical. You can't ask of me 15,000 gold for a certain upgrade, while the fattest purse you can obtain through Witcher contract can yield somewhere around 1,000 gold max. Witchers are not millionaires and they shouldn't be to begin with, unless you are doing some questionable activities. I mean, at the end of the whole game, I had 350,000 gold, and it's ridiculous. It really makes no sense whatsoever. Merchants should also have more money, but that can be sorted in another way. You can have your own favorite merchant or a merchant friend, and you can just offload all kinds of stuff at him, and then over time he sells it and you get the money minus a certain percentage for his services. If you played KCD2, think of the sale chest in that game, which was added with the Forge DLC. You just dump stuff there, and every day or so you are gathering the profit of the stuff that you decided to sell. Finally, balancing economy around contracts is also important since that's how the game operates in the first place. Sure, Craftsmen may ask money from you so they can craft your stuff, but it shouldn't be ludicrously expensive, especially if you are bringing your own materials. They should only charge a fee for making the item, and that's about it. Maybe if you help them and you are friendly with them, you get the discount too. Number 6. Combat. To be quite honest with you, when it comes to combat, I didn't really have a lot of issues. However, there are some things I would like to point out. Combat can feel a bit floaty and disconnected, with Geralt's movements lacking weight and precision. Attacks often slide from one animation into another without clear physical grounding, giving the impression that Geralt is gliding across the battlefield rather than engaging in grounded tactile swordplay. This particular disconnect makes fights feel visually dramatic but mechanically hollow. Another issue comes in a form of responsiveness and animation commitment. Once an attack, dodge, or sign attack is initiated, you have a limited ability to react or cancel actions. This leads to situations where Geralt takes unavoidable damage not because of poor decision making, but because the game doesn't allow timely responses. It can sometimes feel unfair rather than challenging, especially on higher difficulties where enemy damage is punishing. I believe this is called the pair animation system, and that's why these things are happening. While I like difficulty scaling, sometimes it can be a problem, especially on higher difficulty. Enemies become more aggressive and deal significantly more damage, but without corresponding improvements in AI or encounter design. This results in difficulty being derived from inflated numbers rather than deeper mechanics, which can feel frustrating. One example that I always singled out is the Toad Prince battle, but also the duel with Everic. For whatever reason, the difficulty scaling is completely messed up in these two fights. I'd even go further to say that all Heart of Stone boss battles feel messed up because scaling doesn't work properly. So how to make things work better in The Witcher 4? Well, for starters would be to optimize difficulty scaling so we don't expect huge discrepancies when it is on. I mean, you can always turn it off, kill the boss, turn it on again, but that to me seems like cheesing it, and I'm not really a big fan of it. Next thing would be to improve combat animation. While I personally never had huge problems with it, I can understand pair animation system can feel awkward. I wouldn't call it the worst possible combat system ever, but it needs more fluidity, so to speak. Let me elaborate on this a bit. From what I can tell, the clunkiness largely comes from its reliance on paired, canned animations that lock Geralt and enemies into predefined sequences, prioritizing cinematic presentation over responsiveness and player intent. To improve this, you would start by shifting away from animation-dependent hits towards a contact-based system using hitboxes, so attacks connect based on spatial accuracy rather than force alignment, reducing enemy snapping and Geralt's unnatural sliding. Responsiveness could be further enhanced by introducing limited animation cancels, allowing light attacks to transform or transition into dodges, signs, or late parries, while keeping heavy attacks fully committed to preserve a sense of weight. Directional attacks should be driven by player input and camera orientation instead of aggressive auto-targeting, giving players clearer control over positioning and reducing unwanted strikes towards off-screen enemies. Enemy reactions should rely less on paired animations and more on procedural hit responses such as directional flinches, stagger thresholds, and the lightweight poise system, ensuring every hit provides feedback even when it's not lethal. Finishers, instead of forcibly interrupting combat, could become optional and contextual, triggering only on stunned or isolated enemies and blending quickly to maintain flow. Supporting these changes would require smarter enemy AI that spaces itself better and applies pressure without relying on animation locks, while signs and alchemy should interact directly with combat states. You could use them for breaking poise, altering recovery frames, or modifying stagger values, so preparation enhances mechanical skills rather than masking systemic stiffness. Together, These changes would preserve The Witcher's signature animation quality and lethality while removing its dependence on paired animations, resulting in combat that feels deliberate, responsive, and firmly under players' control. In short, keep the animations but kill the dependency. Number 7. Technical issues, bugs, performance, and optimization. Obviously, this one is going to be pretty short. The main idea here is to reduce this as much as possible in order to have a very smooth launch. Personally, I never had issues with these particular problems. I know some people had hard time believing it when I say it, but I genuinely did not encounter anything that was game-breaking. Maybe I was lucky, maybe I didn't see these things. However, it's pretty obvious there were issues at launch since a lot of folks have reported their issues to me. Naturally, all these things have been patched. I mean, it has been 10 years since the game has launched. But that initial impression is what is important here. So I reckon for Witcher 4, the goal is to have 0 bugs and issues at the launch. Maybe I'm too optimistic, so let's say nothing major or game-breaking would be the goal here. Number 8. Quest design and side content. I think it's pretty obvious quest design in The Witcher 3 is widely regarded as one of the game's strongest elements. Still, I have a couple of remarks about certain things. For starters, many quests, especially contracts, follow the same structure. Arrive at the location, activate Witcher Sense, follow highlighted tracks, examine glowing objects, and confront the enemy. While this system is intuitive and works well initially, it becomes the default solution to nearly every investigation. I mean, it's not a huge deal breaker, but still, it's hard not to notice. Another thing that bothers me is the lack of long-term consequences for side quest decisions. Although individual quests may feature moral choices, you might notice that the broader world remains largely unchanged by your actions. Villages rarely evolve, factions seldom respond meaningfully, and the consequences of choices are often confined to isolated outcomes. This can make decisions feel impactful in the moment, but inconsequential in the long run. While I agree there are choices you can make which can influence the outcomes, like I've said, they aren't really that meaningful because you physically don't see them. Let's take Bloody Baron quest for example. While that quest is fantastic, when all is said and done, the area that is under the control of Baron's men, whether you help him or not, stays pretty much the same. One would expect you would see more instances of violence, but not really. You see maybe 2% and that's about it. Another example I can give is the Heart of the Woods quest. When you kill the ancient Leshen, you need to find a marked person because the Leshen will continue to spawn no matter how many times you kill it. Once you find out that the person is Hilde, a young woman that is involved with Sven, you can either exile her or let her be killed. Regardless what you do, when you come back after killing the Leshen, you will see the Sven boy rounded up the others and they kill the elders. And every single time I come back to that village, I see people gathering around the bodies of that elders and they're crying, and that's about it. Yes, something happened, you physically see the result of your actions, but then it's completely static. So I would like to see people going on with their lives. Maybe village deteriorating because some people actually liked the elders and the way they were doing things, stuff like that. So what to do about these things in The Witcher 4? Well, to be relatively short, mix the structure in terms of how the quests are being approached. Is it possible? I think it's hard to say because that's basically the core of Witcher 3 and changing it abruptly might hurt the identity of the game. So to be honest, this is a tough one. On the other hand, long-term consequences can be changed by adding more depth in terms of how the world changes when you make a major choice. Like I said before, it would be nice to see some change in the village, or maybe the village gets burned down or destroyed because of your actions or lack thereof. That would really make you think about what your next decision would be, not to mention adding more replayability to the game itself, which is always a great thing. Number 9. Movement and Traversal. I reckon it's safe to say everyone had issues with these things. This is my take on this. Movement in The Witcher 3 can sometimes feel imprecise and floaty, with Geralt often feeling disconnected from the terrain beneath him. His movement can lack weight and momentum, making him feel as though he slides across the ground rather than planting his feet. This particularly becomes noticeable in combat-adjacent traversal, moving around enemies, navigating uneven terrain, or repositioning during fights, where precise control is essential. Geralt's turning radius, stopping distance, and acceleration can feel a bit sluggish, especially when making small directional adjustments. This often leads to overcorrection, missed interactions, or accidental movement into hazards. Vertical movements and environmental navigation are also lacking. Climbing, jumping, and interactions with ledges can feel unreliable, with Geralt sometimes refusing to climb obvious surfaces or awkwardly snapping into geometry. This is especially visible in urban environments or ruins, where traversal should feel fluid but instead becomes trial and error. While I haven't encountered issues with Roach, it seems this is one of the most widely discussed issues. I have to say I played Red Dead Redemption 2 and I can say horses there are much more responsive than Roach. While this has become something of a meme, I have heard reports where people consistently point out that it damages immersion and makes mounted travel feel unreliable. Again, no issues here, so I reckon I was lucky or I didn't really notice these things. Camera behavior is sometimes weird as well. During both traversal and combat, the camera can swing abruptly, clip into walls, or lose track of enemies and environmental hazards. This is especially noticeable in tight spaces or crowded encounters and can lead to disorientation and frustration. The interaction system has minor issues too. Interacting with objects, NPCs, or loot can feel inconsistent, with prompts appearing only at certain angles or distances. Remember those candles being lit on and off when you are just trying to swipe that coin purse off the table? Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. You keep adjusting your position repeatedly just to trigger an interaction. Like I said, it's minor but still noticeable. Obviously, in Witcher 4, I'd like to see less of these issues, particularly in the movement department as well as interactivity and camera. As for Roach, I can't say I suffered greatly, but I wouldn't say no to a better horseback riding experience. Number 10. AI behavior. What I mean by AI behavior is enemies, monsters, and NPC behavior. In terms of enemies, enemy behavior in The Witcher 3 is functional but a bit shallow, especially in prolonged combat. While enemy variety is visually impressive, most encounters boil down to same basic pattern. Enemies rush Geralt individually, attack in predictable intervals, and rarely coordinate their actions. Groups of enemies don't meaningfully flank, pin, or pressure you in ways that demand tactical repositioning. Instead of feeling like trained soldiers, monsters, or intelligent foes, enemies often behave like isolated actors sharing the same space. This lack of coordination becomes particularly noticeable in humanoid encounters, such as bandits, guards, or soldiers. Rather than working together, for example, shield bearers protecting archers, fighters creating opening for heavy hitters, and so on, enemies typically queue attacks one at a time. This makes combat easier to read but also significantly reduces tension. You quickly learn that dodging or rolling neutralizes most threats, as enemies rarely punish defensive movement or exploit Geralt's momentary vulnerability. Monsters' AI suffers from a similar issue. While bestiary descriptions suggest highly specialized and dangerous creatures, their in-game behavior often fails to reflect that intelligence. Many monsters rely on repetitive attack loops with limited variation, making encounters feel more like endurance tests rather than hunts requiring preparation and adaptation. Once you understand a monster's pattern, the fight often loses its sense of danger, regardless of narrative buildup. Outside of combat, NPC behavior and daily routines are also a bit lacking. While towns and villages are visually rich, many NPCs feel static once you look beyond surface level activity. Daily routines exist in a basic form. NPCs may walk between locations or sleep at night, but these behaviors often lack context or meaningful interactions. They rarely interact dynamically to your actions, nearby events, or world state changes. NPC routines feel disconnected from the game's narrative stakes. War-torn regions may look devastated, but civilians continue predictable, low-impact behaviors regardless of nearby conflicts, monster threats, or Geralt's action. This particular disconnect weakens immersion as the world feels more like a beautifully staged backdrop than a living system responding to danger and consequence. Interactions with NPCs outside quests further reinforce this limitation. Dialogue options are minimal, reactions are often generic, and repeated interactions rarely yield new responses. Once a questline ends, characters frequently revert to idle states, losing the sense that they exist independently of your involvement. This makes settlements feel like hubs for content delivery rather than communities with internal logic. For The Witcher 4, I hope to see AI systems that prioritize cooperation, situational awareness, and believable daily life, turning the world from a stage into a living ecosystem. If you managed to get to the end of this video listening to all my shenanigans, I'd like to point out all of this should be viewed as constructive criticism. Witcher 3 is very dear to me, and even though it might seem I'm only bashing it, that's actually far from the truth. I mean, I played the game 9 times already, so if that isn't a testament of me loving the game, I don't really know what is. For the most part, I'm simply pointing out things that I believe need more polishing. The only aspects I actually do have issues with are itemization and crafting. Rest is pretty much bearable as far as I'm concerned. In any case, this video is a good way of raising awareness about these things, and that's pretty much the purpose of it, pointing out what is not working on an optimal level and suggesting a fix for the next game. Everything that I say in this video is in the service of making Witcher 4 even better than Witcher 3. It won't be easy, but if I can make a contribution towards that goal, I'm already a happy man. Who knows, maybe someone from the dev team will stumble upon this and check it out. Now, that would be a huge honor for me, and so there is that as well. Anyway, thank you very much for watching the video. I'm very curious what you guys think. What was bothering you in The Witcher 3? Do you agree with what I have said? Write in the comment section about your experiences. I can't wait to read your observations. And that's it from me, until the next one.